All right, if panelists, if you could start by sharing your name, your pronouns, your MSW specialization you graduated from, and maybe your current title, just like a little brief about what you currently do and where you're located. And we'll start with Maria.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, my name is Maria. She, her pronouns. I had did my specialization in admin and policy back in graduated in 2019. With actually got my also advanced standing MSW back then, and currently I work with an organization called Common Power. We do a lot of political work, election work, and just engaging voters across the country and here in Washington as well. Most of my job is to lead work and engage volunteers in door knocking for progressive candidates. And yeah, I'm excited to be sharing with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you. Noha, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Noha Mahgoub, she, her pronouns. I graduated from the School of Social Work in 2015, and which seems bonkers, but it's been 10 years. And I am currently the Chief of Staff for the Senate Democratic Caucus down in Olympia for the state legislature.
Awesome. Thank you. And Seferiana?
Hi, everyone. Safriana Day, she, her pronouns. I graduated in 2011. I can't even count how many years that's been. It's been a while. From the UW School of Social Work. I was in the CCIP, Community-Centered Integrative Practice specialization, but I did take a lot of policy classes when I was there. I currently work at the City of Seattle in the Office of Planning and Community Development. I'm the communications manager and council liaison, so I work a lot with our mayor's office and council members.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And Sarah, if you can just let me know when Indalco arrives, I'm keeping an eye on our chat, but he'll be here in just a few moments. Oh, thanks, Noha. Noha specialized in admin and policy for those just in the chat. Um, Great. If you could all share next, I'm curious what professional, personal, academic experiences brought you to social work, and why did you choose specifically to pursue an MSW and then enter into more macro spaces? And was that your original intent when you came to social work? And we'll start with Maria again.
Sure. I would say that my journey to social work was definitely a foundation of who I was. And I am a former DACA recipient, an undocumented person in this country. So that was one of the reasons why just helping and supporting advocacy for immigration was really important to me at the time when I was a student in college. And it wasn't until one of my friend's mom was a social worker and early on in my childhood, and I remembered that. And for whatever reason, I was like, social work, social work. And it was so inspiring to see other folks in my proximity doing really great advocacy work. And that really truly is what led me to social work, was just like the feeling of like being around people that were similarly minded, like people that wanted to support policy and push for not just immigration, but other policies to support underserved communities. And I was really lucky to end up in a space where I was able to learn about how to continue that work. And yeah, so that's really what led me to social work, was personal, and then also later on more professional avenues that kind of inspired me to be in that space.
Awesome. Thank you. Nohad, do you want to share next? And here, I'll put our question in the chat too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I graduated actually with an undergraduate degree in sociology. I've always been like a big systems thinker. I'm like really interested in data, and I think it just tells us a lot. And so I was once then I kind of learned a lot of that. I thought, oh, there's so much intergenerational stuff happening, and my heart was drawn to working with people, but I appreciated having that understanding of kind of how this is impacting us on a system-wide basis. I did direct service social work for a long time. I worked with people in recovery, and I worked with youth in foster care that were aging out. And I got increasingly more frustrated with how I felt like the state legislature would make these decisions that were like impossible for us to actually do. It was just like, oh, like make sure that they're enrolled in college at 18. It's like, do you have any idea how behind they are because you've moved them 12 times? And also people don't miraculously turn 18 the day they graduate high school, even in best case. So I just was kind of getting really frustrated. And so I went to graduate school with the full intention of just figuring out how to do direct social work better. And I met a woman the first day of my first year in the MSW program. And I always joke with her that she ruined my life because I was just going to fully go back and keep doing what I was doing. And she said to me, like, you've done that for years. You're here spending a lot of money. You need to do something that's new for you and that challenges you. So that sent me over to administration. I then interned for now State Senator Tina Orwell, but she was a House rep at the time. And, just she's someone who gives you so much access to how the legislature works. She shared her office with me. I got to be in all of her negotiation meetings. This was back when she was doing a really, really massive bill. And I was I just remember being in a negotiation with her, with members of law enforcement, and we were dealing with a really sensitive issue. And these members who were lobbyists for this, interest group said, well, we really want to focus our resources on real crime. And like, that's my village origin story. I was like, wow, like we just don't matter to you. Like our communities just don't matter to you, right? So we worked really hard. We passed that bill and it just kind of set me off on a path of saying like, oh, we actually need a lot of social workers here where there are very few is in this policymaking space. So, you got a lot of MPAs, you've got a lot of, attorneys, but what's needed so desperately in the space down in Olympia is social workers. So I have then now served for 11 sessions down in Olympia. And it is absolutely maddening, but it's also amazing. So
Thank you for sharing, Noha. And thanks for highlighting too, like how social work careers can be really fluid. Like I think most social workers don't stay in just micro for their whole career or just macro I think especially macro for their whole career, or in just meso. This degree like can be really broad and but also highlighting the intense need for macro level social workers right now, especially. Thank you. Seferiana, do you want to share?
Sure. So I was also a sociology major, and I really was very driven thinking about systems and organizing. And so when I got to the UW, I guess right before I came to the master's program, I was doing AmeriCorps and I was working with a group called Powerful Voices. I believe they have practicum actually. They're a practicum site. But they run groups with girls in middle school and high school. Mostly they serve girls of color. And so I think I was 19 when I first volunteered with them. And was just so moved by kind of even myself as a young person, working with even younger folks. And so that was always sticking with me as I was kind of applying to UW and wanting to go into social work. But I still had this real desire to do organizing and be involved in politics. From being a young kid, I was just, for some reason, I was obsessed with voting. I was like all about, you know, politics and watching it on TV, and I was just very nerdy about it. And so I think through the program, I took a class on organizing with someone who was the former Department of Neighborhoods director here and had done a lot of neighborhood organizing, but kind of showed us the differences between like old school organizing and sort of the new, kind of a new school of organizing. And that really drove me to my first job, which was in labor organizing with Working Washington and SEIU. So that's kind of where I worked on my first campaign. So I kind of just followed the path, and it ended up running a Senate campaign for Pramila Jayapal when she was her very first campaign. And then I was very interested in coming kind of to the inside, working in city government. And I think just that it's all kind of interrelated, like the interpersonal kind of that, working with girls. One of those girls is now in her like 30 years old and has worked at City Hall, and seeing people kind of grow up in that process has been really amazing. But I think it's like I go back to thinking about social work as kind of that almost applied sociology where I was like, I know all this information. I'm talking about intersectionality. I was also a women's studies major. So like we're all talking about these issues, but then how do we actually put them into practice? And so I think that's what like ultimately drove me to the social work program was like knowing that I could really make an impact on all these issues that we were talking about at a theoretical level. So that's where I find a lot of meaning, and have kind of melded my social work into my political kind of career.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I know all of you kind of touched on this a little bit for our next question, but I'm curious, what does it mean to you to center community voices and lived experiences in the systems level work you do, whether that's at City Hall or in campaign management, in the Senate, in canvassing and outreach? How do you do that today in your current role? And do you have any examples of how that transformed your approach to your work, or maybe an example where it wasn't present and you had to kind of go back to the drawing board on a project you were working on. And I've put the question in the chat too if folks need to refer. Maria, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Well, I've done a lot of election work in the past 6 years. I was also a campaign manager for a bit before I came to Con Power. And what I will say is that, I haven't had the policy experience yet here, but I think in general, centering voices of the folks that we're serving is just absolutely important, especially when it comes to elections. And we know that there's so many underserved communities who don't have access to tools or resources that support them or encourage them or empower them to go to the polls every year. A lot of the underserved communities go to the polls every 4 years. They don't know about local elections. They don't understand how to be involved in their legislature, right? Or like go to, for example, here in Washington, to go to Olympia to fight for their rights, right, as residents of the state. And so I think in my work, I've definitely tried my best to, in past spaces in my practicums, for example, as well, is to ensure that the folks that I'm working with, whether that's in a program or an election cycle with volunteers, is to who are reaching out to voters, is to encourage them to always ask questions to voters and center their stories and kind of ensure that the stories that they're listening from those voters and why they might not be voting, why they might be, kind of in this mindset of like my voice doesn't matter. We take those stories and we really truly try to understand why that is, right? Like what systems, what else can we do? Actually, yesterday I was in a really great conversation with folks in Central Washington. We've done work in there as well, and we're trying to figure out why are Latinx, Latina folks not engaged in these important races, not just nationally or federal races, but also in their local communities. They're tired. They don't believe in the system, which is totally fair. And so centering their voices, asking them what they need, asking them how they want to be approached, and how it is that we can build tools to ensure that they feel connected to that space and to that system is really important. And I think in the past, things that we've done is surveys or like ensuring that we invite them to um, town halls and like, ensuring that their voices are represented in those spaces when they're a lot of the time they're not. So that's one example that I can give. And also in my lobbying experience, I think I was a student in the at the Arc of King County back in 2019, which is a amazing organization that supports families with folks who have a mental disability and disabilities. And we would take them to Olympia, right? The families, and they would be able to speak to the representatives to ensure that these resources are given to their loved ones, and to support programs that would benefit their loved ones. And so I think that that is always something that I remember is like, how do we engage the communities that we're trying to serve and not just speak on their behalf, but also actually encourage them and empower them to do it themselves.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think policy work is often seen as like lofty in a ways, and sometimes like it's definitely can be like inaccessible, and that's can be like a weakness sometimes. But integrating the community voices in the way that you have is so powerful and important. And it's sometimes as social workers, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, we're doing this a lot, but that's what really social workers do bring to this table and need to continue doing. So thank you. Nohan, do you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I throughout my career, right, I've done in the legislature, I did everything. I was the intern, I was a legislative assistant, I did direct policy work for 5 years, went to the governor's office and did housing and homelessness for 2 years, and then came back to do chief of staff. So I've kind of had every level in Olympia anyway of engagement with community. And when I did policy work, it was so much easier because it was something tangible, and I could say like, oh, we want to solve this problem. I still had a lot of connections in the social work world that I would say, please, we need feedback here. from if we're trying to solve this problem for this community, we really need to check in with that community. And that's something, honestly, like I think we all know that broadly, but the school of social work really hammered that into me that like if I'm trying to solve a problem for someone and they're not informing that solution, then that's just nonsense, right? It's a bad practice, it's a bad policy. So that school social work really helped me with that and really understanding how to do that engagement. Now, the challenge in the legislature is we are a part-time legislature for our members. And so they are in session for 105 days or 60 days. So when we're trying to solve issues for bills that we don't know are coming in 60 days, you tell me how good is that outreach going to be if we haven't already done it? It's not, it's going to be bad, right? So my job has always been try to maintain connections to the best of my ability with stakeholders, lobbyists, you name it, so that we're always listening. And I do a lot of that work in the interim so that I understand what are your priorities, what are you asking us to do, and making sure I always take that phone call if there's a new amendment or something pops up that's not great. But I will tell you the worst time for us to do good policy is during session. And the best time is in the interim if you're looking for legislative stuff. So I'll just kind of put a pin there for folks. I'm happy to get way more into that, but I think if we went down that rabbit hole, it would take the rest of this time, and I really don't want to do that. But so I do my best to keep checking in to do, to make sure that we're hearing people and that they're the ones that are informing. But at the end of the day, too, like we all know what the best policy is. We have to get 25 votes for it, and then we have to pay for it. So it's never going to quite be what we know is probably best practice, and that's always a real big challenge that we try to balance in our world.
Thank you, Noha. And Sefriana, yeah, do you want to share what it means to center community voices in your role or in a host, you've had a host of roles, what it's looked like in your work? And I know that you did our CCIP, which is community-centered integrative practice, or more like meso specialization. I'm curious too if that's informed how you approach policy and macro work too.
Yeah, I think coming from kind of an organizing background, I think it was always important for me to really kind of open the doors for community organizations. I'm thinking specifically working at a city council. I was a legislative aide for Councilmember Tim Burgess, who I was not necessarily politically aligned with, but he gave me a really great opportunity to kind of learn how to do policymaking under him. And I remember I would meet with groups like Got Green, or we would meet with, groups that were doing like really great organizing work. And I really felt it was my responsibility to show folks, this is how it works. This is how the system works. This is who you should reach out to move that piece of legislation. There were times where I would say, like, my boss may not go for that, but talk to Councilmember Sawant or talk to Mike O'Brien. There was also an instance where we had the Capitol Hill, gosh, what was it called? I can't remember what it was called. But there was a group several years ago. They approached us. They really wanted to start a renters commission. And my boss said, like, let's do it. Go forth. And that was probably one of my favorite, I guess, accomplishments, was working with community to write legislation to establish the Renters Commission, which over the years we've had to kind of watched council change hands. There's been a lack of support for it, kind of waning support, but I think we're kind of starting to see that come back. And so it's like, I just feel like legislative staff are kind of can be the gatekeepers. And so it's like, how do we open the doors to communities that are doing the great work and really elevating their voices in the policymaking process?
Thank you. Yeah, and I liked how you kind of talked about being like CCIP. A lot of times we talk about like being like mitigation between kind of policy and communities too, or like a liaison. So I like how you really discussed that, because that's a big part, I think, of the social work aspect to policy work as well, is that we're not just sitting with our like legislative title or something. We want to, yeah, have the doors open as much as possible and include community as possible, and a lot of that is education and mitigation between communities and policymakers. So thank you. And Indalkachu, welcome. Thank you for being here. As you know, we're talking about community involvement. How do you include community voices and lived experiences and systems in your work? But first, if you'd like to introduce yourself, maybe your name, pronouns, where you're currently working, what kind of work you're doing, and what your specialization was in your MSW program.
Yeah, I'd
And I'll put
love
the
to.
question in the chat.
Is my audio coming through fine? Fantastic. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Indolka Chu. I am a community partnerships and HR project manager at Highline Public Schools, and I'm also an instructor for Social Work 519 at the UW, so health and mental health system. So thank you for having me. I apologize for my tardiness. We are actively going through an $8 million budget cut heading into this year. So as you can imagine, a lot of pressing conversations taking place. And the nature I feel, and I've learned over time of policy making is oftentimes centered in relationships. And I think everybody has highlighted that within their responses. And those relationships are centered in giving the resource and the tools for folks who have historically have not had those opportunities available to them. So that looks different, whether I'm at the school district or at the UW. Primarily at the UW, one of the things I prioritize is making sure that all of our students have a good sense of honestly how a bill becomes a law. And I know that sounds pretty rudimentary, but it's helpful for us to be empowered and to know how complex systems operate on a day-to-day basis and where you can fit based on your capacity and based on your level of readiness. And that also looks very similar in the way that I work with students. This past year, the legislature proposed a bill around cell phones and cell phone restrictions for school districts, and our students were not huge fans. And so the directive was, well, how do you share your feedback? What does it look like for you at a very young age to be engaged in civic education? And so it's always very important for us to recognize that as folks who are intimately engaging in the policy world on a day-to-day basis, not everybody is doing that. So we have to collectively build our capacity and empower others to participate in that process and feel comfortable doing so. The other part that's important for us is recognizing that folks have oftentimes been historically ousted from these systems. And so you're going to have to not only build skills, but also focus on healing and rebuilding some of those relationships. And that's been one of the most challenging parts, particularly in classes when folks feel jaded in conversation or they struggle to hold space for extremely complex and divisive topics that have proved detrimental to communities. They feel like these aren't even topics that they want to engage with. But we have to break down those barriers. We have to build those relationships, whether that's happening in the classroom or at a system level at large. So prior to my time at Highline Public Schools, I worked at the Washington State Healthcare Authority, overseeing substance use prevention and mental health promotion services for the eastern half of the state. And one of the primary focuses for us were empowering communities. And so we would deliver services in a way that each community that was determined to be high risk for substance use or mental health developed a community coalition of community leaders. We would train each of those volunteers, those community leaders, on a public health framework, how to identify the root causes, the risks, and the protective factors of their community, and how to properly go through the policy making process or the program designing process, right? So we're not just giving you a prescription, we're co-designing with you. And working with folks throughout that process was really helpful in recognizing that folks have the answers to the most pressing issues in their community. What we have to do in the system is really give them the tools they need and empower them to take that initial first step. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Indalkachu. Next, I'm curious in a variety of ways, it can be kind of a more challenging time to be in social work at this time. I'm curious, what are the biggest systems level challenges, in your opinion, social workers are facing in your area of work or that you're facing right now? And how are you or your organizations working to respond to those? Maria, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, it's a good question because we actually touched on that. I was mentioning I was part of conversation for folks in Central Washington, voters in Central Washington. But I'm seeing this also here locally in our city with the presence of ICE in our communities at the moment. It is very, very hard to outreach to folks right now. It's a very scary time, and I think that the systems that we're dealing with and the problems that we're dealing with in our communities are more pressing than ever in terms of fear. And so I think the one of the ways that we're trying to kind of um, support communities with that is just by reminding them that they're still, their needs are still very much important and valued, and that we're seeing, the struggles that they're going through. It's really hard to come to a door because I mobilize a lot of volunteers to door knock to engage voters throughout the year. And so we've seen definitely like a lack of like, of course, like trust or mistrust, right? Mistrust in the systems right now, especially in terms of engaging them in voting and engage them in the system of government. And so in healthcare, right? I've heard as well in those systems as well is where the fear is kind of lingering. So just to answer your question, I think yes, we've seen those issues pop up, and not just with ICE, but I think just in general, like this mistrust of services, mistrust of whether if I'm giving my information away, is something going to happen to my family and I. So it's definitely going to be important for us to continue to outreach to those communities and remind them that even though there's like this fear, we make sure that we're going to be going to them versus expecting them to come to us. That's actually something that I've always highlighted is like we need to go to these communities. We can't expect them to come to us with these issues and kind of build that trust, right? I think something that and Dr. Chu highlighted is like it's important for us to ensure that they have this trust in us and they have the trust in the services, and that that they are telling us how we can support them is actually really important right now, especially.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've also seen that as a big issue in a lot of other areas as well. Noha, I mean, you're in the heart of the Senate in Washington state government. What are some of the biggest challenges social workers are facing in your realm?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about the space of the legislature, right, is you're not just dealing with policy, you're also dealing with politics. And those things are very intertwined, but also, like, to be honest, success in one sometimes is at the expense of the other. And folks sometimes know exactly what the right thing to do is, but politically, you might not be able to get that support because people are, excuse me, they're elected, right? That doesn't mean that they know all of these issues or that they understand them in the way that we would hope that they would, right? So that's kind of one consideration. Another one is we often also know what we need to do, but it costs, like doing the right thing costs money, right? It takes investment in our communities. We are the ones, in my opinion, government has been the one that has caused such historical harm. And so to even try to right size it, you need to be able to do it to make those investments. And we do not, like right now, we're at like, I don't even $12 billion shortage in our budget, right? So even then, if we can get political support for something that we know is really important, now you have this added barrier of trying to have the financial means to do what you need to do or do what is right. So I feel like we just have a ton of barriers in being able to do what we want or what we hope can be done as social workers, let alone, then translating that into the political sphere where there are very few of us. And so we're not using the same language. We're not, we don't have the same end goal. And I think other panelists have said really brilliant stuff. I mean, that's one of our biggest challenges, right? Is that we're also, it's hard to connect with us, right? It's hard to connect with us. Um, we had advocacy days in which I was meeting with lobbyists and trying to plan exit routes in case I showed up, and where can we put people in which we can deny entry. I mean, imagine that being as something that you have to consider if you can even come and get your voice heard. I mean, what a horrible situation. So I just like I'm not trying to come across as negative. I love that I'm there. I love that we're getting more and more social workers there, that we're growing in Olympia, which is awesome. But we just have a lot of really tough barriers that we need to make sure that we're there for so that we can try to help steer the ship in a good direction.
Thank you, Noha. Yeah, I think it's really important to highlight like policy work is so important, and it could be really exhausting, and it can be um, an uphill battle at times. And right now, I know with state budgets and th and a lot of other things going on, I feel similarly as working in a similar area to you. Seferiana, would you like to share some of the biggest challenges that you're facing in your realm of social work and
Sure.
how maybe you're working to address them?
Yeah, and I think it's sort of related to NOHA's response just around, like I work at the planning office in Seattle. I work with a lot of planners, urban planners. They're planning kind of where housing goes in the city, and sort of social work adjacent, but it's a really political hot button issue when you think about, how to upzone the city so that we can have more diverse housing and allow people to live, to stay rooted and not be pushed out of the city. And that was a really challenging process over the last couple of years because we had a mayor who really pushed back on the plan that we had. And I think that was really difficult. Like speaking to the politics of the policy, like when you don't have someone who has the political willpower to be bold and to kind of make, perhaps homeowners in North Seattle upset, it was really demoralizing for our office, for our planners, for me as the person communicating this out to the world, to work with our city council, that a majority of them were kind of on board with that. So it can just be personally challenging. And I think there were a lot of folks who were like, just wait it out, just wait it out. And, we had an election, we're going to have a new mayor. Um, Very exciting. We also have an MSW coming to council. And so I think in a way, I think as someone I used to have a consulting firm. I used to run candidates for office. I think that is a way to solve the problem, is to run for office and to encourage people with social work degrees and a background in human services or direct practice or a social justice lens to run and to really make it more accessible for folks. Because when we're here, whether we're in office or whether we're working, you know, making policy, I think there's so much power when we just get involved in the system. And so that is my 2 cents. If anyone wants to know how to run, I think there's a lot of us here that can help with that. But also go to MSW school.
Yes, that first, and then run. That's a big question. That's a really big question. And Dalkachu, working in healthcare, that's kind of also a really politicized area too, facing a lot of unique challenges right now. What are some of the biggest that you're seeing in your field and how you're mitigating those?
I'll be transparent. I'm in education now, and I honestly wish I was in healthcare because at least it'll be a little bit more digestible. Education just exists at the intersection of so many different things. So when you're having, federal mandates, state restrictions, and even any adjustments of legislative priorities, you start to feel it because you're actively interacting with students, their families, right? And we're a predominantly Hispanic district at within the Highline School District, so we feel a lot of the whiplash, right? We feel it directly from our teachers to our district personnel. So it's quite intense. The other part of it is also just being an instructor at UW and getting a pulse on what is the general perception of students as they're working with their clients, right? Many of them are in field practicums, and so they're not only students that are learning the theories and the principles on how to be an effective social worker, but they're actively in the field navigating the day-to-day challenges. And so you're having people come into classrooms feeling a little bit weighted, at times even feeling jaded and needing some not only learning spaces, but also caring spaces and creative spaces on how we can start to make some strides on some of these complex challenges. For us, in terms of the school district, I mentioned earlier, we do have a huge budget deficit, similar to what we're seeing in the state. And so that means we're having to make really hard decisions around what is what is deemed critical, right? Um, and it's really hard. These are really hard decisions. And so um, we don't do a really good job of funding basic education in the state in full transparency. We do our best, but when you're at a $12 billion shortfall and revenue projections don't seem as good, you're just going to have to make really tough decisions. And so we're reeling from that. we'll probably let go of some very important and talented people. And that's unfortunate because these are people that know our students by name, they know them by their strengths, they know them by their needs. And in critical times when everybody's feels like their backs are against the wall, this is when you want to have those caring and supportive individuals in spaces. And so we're actively having to think about how do we sustain um, our workforce to the best of our ability? How do we continue these, because every service to us is critical, right? So how do we sustain these services at a time when our communities need it the most? And on the other part, just being at UW, it's the idea of how do we create caring spaces for social workers as they start to feel this pressure in and out in the workforce. And not only that, coupled with how do we come up with, creative solutions within our field. Um, my partner is in tech, and they were mentioning that they do hackathons. So what does it look like for us to do a social hackathon, right? Where we come together and we start to think about creative solutions in our community, right? Why don't we have a space like that at the UW? We have the brain power for it, we have the capacity for it, but I think would be very helpful for us in and maybe just bring the level of calm and ease into the space because we're actively making strides on developing innovative solutions or at least making the space for it. So yeah, but it tends to be a moving target for us. And right now, everything is crisis management and all hands on deck.
Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, I know we're in definitely a very unique time for social work and macro social work. And so it's really important to hold how heavy some of these challenges can be, but I'm also curious, how are you able to create meaningful progress across different interest groups in your work? I know some of you have touched on this a little bit already, but I'm curious if you have any other thoughts about that. And also maybe just tacking this on, how are you able to practice any self-care during this time? Because you're all addressing really like issues that are bigger than any individual, of course. So how are you able to either clock out at the end of the day or take care of yourself and acknowledge that this is a long process and it's going to be an ongoing challenge maybe for a while, or that these systems maybe won't be solved, in a day or by one bill. How are you able to grapple with all of that? Marianne, do you want to start?
And the first part was around like how are we I'm sorry. Can you repeat the
Oh,
question?
no worries. Yeah, when you're experiencing either like polarization or gridlock or coming up against these bigger challenges in social work, what strategies do you use to create meaningful progress across
Hmm.
different interest groups in your work?
Yeah, I think actually, and I'm so sorry to go back to the same example, but I think just in my experience as a professional social worker, but also as a person who is very much tied to my community and to the roots of my grassroots work back then, I think it's so important to um, coalition build. I feel like coalition building is tremendously important in these times. We're all trying to do very similar things. Like even just in this room, I love the feel of camaraderie and like how we're all doing our part in our different sections and our different work. And the ways that I find that hope and that like ability to continue the work is truly through building spaces and building work with other people that are like-minded and that understand that I don't have to, like kind of like convinced that this is important. That's really gotten me through the through the hole, I would say, like through the black hole of all the crazy things that are happening in today's world. So coalition building is one way that I've definitely felt secure and like safe in that space to see other people like myself, but also folks who are coming together to build those spaces, right, for their communities, and to come together and say, hey, like this is something similar that we want to build for our communities. Why don't we do it together? And as social workers, we learned, right, not to repeat or like to what was the word? Oh my goodness. Yeah, to just like build the similar things that are already out there. Why don't we just make it better? Like how do we ensure that these programs are working for our communities? So that's one way. And then in terms of the self-care, I definitely find myself kind of just like doom scrolling and just being super sad about whatever's happening. But I think at the end of the day, I find a lot of hope and care and love in with my friends, with my friends, my family. I think that always brings me back to the root of who I am and why I do this work. And so self-care always looks like taking a walk or, getting off, social media. That always helps mentally. But also doing something with, with my body and like working and moving around and showing that I'm able to sustain my energy to continue this work.
Thank you. Noha, do you want to share how you're able to create progress in your work across interest groups and practice self-care to kind of check out of all of this sometimes?
Sure. I mean, I think, we've talked a lot about how in my place of work, things are very political. And it's really easy to say you're on the opposite side of this issue from me, so you're a bad person. Or you're always, you represent this interest group and I want this thing, you're a bad person. And that really scares me. And I'm not like, don't get me wrong, I'm not like there's good people on both sides. Like, that's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about like um, when you have oh, I wish I could remember that James Baldwin quote, which is like, we can agree to disagree as long as it's not like rooted in my humanity and oppression. Like, you know what I mean? Um, so I work with people all the time that I do agree with, but they are still human beings. And if we're talking about things like tax structure, et cetera, like, you're not a bad person for disagreeing with me. And I really feel like if we lose the ability to see each other as human beings, we're in trouble. And I feel like we're kind of veering in that direction with how politicized things are getting. Current president is like a absolutely bonkers example, right? But like the majority of people are not that bonkers. And so we have to keep saying, I see you and let's work together. And that has really helped me in my job. And like one of the guys I fought with, because I actually did housing policy for a long time. So I know exactly what you're talking about when you're talking about housing zoning and planning and all that. And I fought with my buddy Carl at the Association of Washington Cities every year. He and I would go heads up all the time. And as soon as we were done with our meeting, he'd say, how's your wife? How's your daughter? And I'd say, great. And we talk about our kids. And I'd be like, what are you guys up to right now? Right? Because thank you, Alexandria. I see you for that vote. Yes. And so then, because at the end of the day, if we see each other as people, I would much rather try to solve this problem with you. And if we don't like each other and then we have no incentive to try to lean in and say, we might be on opposite sides, but how can we just try to figure this out and make one little step towards progress? And in my world, in the legislature, you're just not going to get these like big giant wins, right? Where you get everything you want. That just does not exist. And so you have to, if you want progress, you have to figure out how to work with people that just aren't on the same page, period. So I also think social workers should be everywhere. So I also know a lot of lobbyists and people get mad at them. Like, how could they take that job for insert company name here? Like, I'd much rather it be my friends getting paid good money, right? Who can then donate to progressive candidates. Like, and I'd rather work with you when we're fighting about tax policy, when I know you and like you, than somebody I hate who's not, we're not going to want to take a meeting anyway. So I also don't, I think it's like important to not put these purity tests on each other, right? And just be like, well, you should, like, social workers should be everywhere. And I think we could solve a lot more problems before. So, and the last thing I'll say about self-care is I feel like right now we are surrounded by so much true pain and true misery. And it's really hard to give ourselves permission to feel joy. But I'm going to encourage you all to allow yourself to feel joy, because that to me is resistance in its own way, where they want to beat us down. And we are complex and caring creatures, and we can do both. We can care deeply about our neighbors being harmed in our community, and we can go and fight the good fight and do everything we can. But if we let them take our joy, that to me is devastating. So whatever that looks like for you, preserve it, nurture it, don't give up on it, because I think that's what's going to keep us in the fight for the long haul, and we need to be in the fight for the long haul. So.
Thank you, Noha. That was really powerful. And I don't have a full, well-formed response to that right now. I'm just still sitting with it. But thank you. Thank you. So Fariana, do you want to share?
Sure. I don't know if I can top joy, because I feel that. But yeah, I think on a similar kind of in a similar wavelength, I was thinking about just the power of listening, and I think that's kind of like the first skill you learn as a social work student is like active listening, and just how listening and hearing others can be so disarming. I think about we had open houses, to talk about the zoning proposal, and it was like people yelling at us, but we listened and we said, okay, we hear you. And I think that elected officials, that's like one thing that people can do. I think that's something that my former boss taught me was always take the meeting with the person, even if you don't agree, you might find common ground, you might find common values. And so I think that's something that I think social workers uniquely bring to the table is this desire to really listen and to know people. Um, and I think for my self-care, oh my gosh, I worked for several years on campaigns and I feel like I've done my time and I in a way that like I worked so hard and now I'm like I remind myself this is a job. This is my job. And I have definitely life's work and, passion for social justice work. And at the end of the day, I'm like, it's 5 or 6 o'clock and I'm done. And I'm going to hang out with my dog. Tonight, I'm going to go see Padma at Benaroya Hall. I'm really excited. So that's what I'm going to do for self-care.
That is fabulous self-care. And Dalkachu, do you want to share?
Yeah, I'd love to share. One of the awesome things about being queued up towards the back end of this awesome lineup is a lot of people say the things you're gonna say. So, what I could do is certainly reemphasize. Noah mentioned earlier in the previous question, um, the value of relationships, but also the importance of building those relationships ahead of the legislative session, because that's when you win, right? You don't win the legislative session during the legislative session. And then Maria emphasized the value of coalition building and relationship building. And those are so important. And these are things that we can actively do every day as social workers, right? Cipriana mentioned the value of listening. So, how are we making sure that we're listening? We're empowering those who have not been in these spaces before and elevating their voice. That's our strength as social workers is that we're as close to the ground as possible. We have direct contact with students, with families, with clients that are directly having a hard time. And so how do we make sure that we're empowering their voice? The other part is recognizing that there are common wins and ground level values, so we could always lean into at certain points when the going gets tough. So versus focusing on the ideological differences that you may have with others, right? What are those common values? And leading conversations onto those. What are our common wins that we could take away? And for me, it's always empowering when I'm in a classroom and I see students that may not see eye to eye, but they're working and they're collaborating together. Because that's what you're going to have to do out in the workforce. Not everybody's going to look like you, not everybody's going to think like you, but you're going to have to develop common solutions, right? We're going to have to cut $8 million. Not everybody's going to have the same idea on how to do that. There's going to be differences and we're going to have to figure it out. That doesn't mean, as Noah said, that person is a bad person or any of this. We just have to figure things out together and we have to be creative problem solvers together. There's a book that I would recommend to you all, which is Rest is Resistance. If you burn out, we lose. That is a summary. So don't burn out. Whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, do it. If you burn out as a social worker, we lose. So the first priority is making sure that you're okay and that you're taking care of yourself, and the rest can build on that. So just keep that in mind at all points. Take care of yourself.
Thank you, Indalkachu. And Noha, your plane is here. It sounds like. Do you have any final either words of wisdom, advice, James Baldwin quotes, like anything along those lines that you want to share before you head out?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of prospective students here. And so what I will just tell you is I hope that you're getting something helpful from us. And I really will offer up to the group I am so happy to answer any follow-up questions you have, to just be a resource. If you're wondering what to do, you're wondering if this kind of policy work is for you, truly, please reach out. I think you guys can share my contact information for my ledge email. And I think just we need y'all. So I hope that you feel like there's a space for you here, regardless of what path you may be inspired by. And just thank you so much for having me, and my fellow panelists. Y'all are amazing. And Dr. Chu, it's good to see you again today. I remember you from your time in Ledge. So thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been awesome.
Thank you, Noha. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. Safe travels, and I'll put your contact in the chat. Um, all right. Maria, would you like to, I know we've got about a few minutes left. Do you have any final thoughts, any advice you would give to emerging social workers, skills they should have, or just any closing thoughts you'd like to share? We've got a variety of prospective social work students they're in a variety of places of their social work journey, but yeah, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like this sounds really corny, but follow your heart. I think that policy, macro, micro, whatever you want to do in social work, we need you, like Adele said, like we really need everyone right now. And I think that whatever you decide to do is going to be the best thing to do. I think, it's always important to get as many skills as you can, but in terms of like your work and what you want to do, but it's super important that your heart is in it. I always said that I wanted to become a social worker, and a lot of folks who said they wanted to become social workers, or like I saw, social workers in the field, your heart really has to be in it. So just, make sure that you follow that, and that you understand why you're doing it. I think is really important, and have some purpose in it. But at the end of the day, I'm sure whatever you decide is going to be tremendously important, especially nowadays, and especially in the world that we're living in. So yeah, follow your heart, and remember why you're doing it, and who you're doing it for. Because I think that that's what helped me was, my family, my community. That's why I did it. And I feel like every day it just becomes more purposeful because of that. And also, I'm happy to share my contact as well. Reach out.
Yeah, thank you. If you want to drop that in the chat, please feel free. Seferiana, do you have any closing advice or thoughts for prospective social workers, prospective macro social workers?
Sure, I have similar words. I was going to say follow your passions if there are issue areas that are exciting to you. Um, there are countless policies you can work on. I also think that what I love about the MSW degree is that it's so flexible. So I've been a macro social worker for over a decade, and I sometimes dream about being a therapist. And I know that I could probably do that if I wanted to, and vice versa. Like, I think if you are going in the direct practice route, but you decide you want to do policy, you're going to bring so much knowledge and experience, like lived experience too, to that. And so it's all valuable. I would also, yeah, encourage you to reach out if you have questions or want an informational interview. I would say we're probably all available for that. And that the Seattle political and policy scene is small and cozy, and it's like a big community. So if you're like, oh, I really am interested in working at the city or the state, there are people that would love to talk to you and like show you the way. And I think that it's just such a supportive place that, I've been part of for many years. And I think it's like a wonderful kind of community to be in. So I'll end with that.
Thank you. And then in Dalkachu, do you have any last advice for prospective macro social workers?
Yeah, the general feedback I give to many of my students is be realistic with the type of life that you want to live and the quality of life that you want to live. I think as social workers, we have a way of compromising a lot on the quality of life that we want to live individually. And that should be something that factors in to your decision making. That is also, you're asking yourself, what do I love? What do I want to do? But also, what's realistic for you and the quality of life that you want to live? Also, what technical skills could you acquire that you could apply a social work lens to, which can help expand sort of the career avenues and pathways that are available to you. Our assistant superintendent is an MSW. Our director of HR is an MSW, right? We have many project managers that are MSWs. That's all connected to a technical skill that they're applying a social work and a social justice lens to. So don't feel constricted in the sense of, here's an ideal pathway that many of others have traveled before me, and I'm going to replicate this step, right? If you're somebody who's very creative, like how can you apply social work lens to that? If you're somebody who's centered in organizational change management or leadership, how could you apply social work? If you're somebody who's extremely tech savvy, what does it look like for you to apply a social work lens to that? Right? AI, like we need a lot of work around the integration of technology and behavior health. Like, what does that look like? And we need folks that are social workers at the forefront of those conversations, not at the back end. So, be confident in asking your questions around what's the quality of life that you want to live, and how do you work towards that. Um, and then just reemphasizing if you could do internships, if you could shadow people, informational interview coffees, like please do. I did an informational interview with Noah, like when I was a legislative intern a couple years ago, a while back. So, yeah, please do that. Social workers are very eager to talk about social working.
Yeah, thank you, Ndalgachu. And thank you all so much for panelists, for Maria, Seferiana, and Ndalgachu for taking time out of your evening. Um, all of you had really amazing words to share. And honestly, as a policy student, this event was also self-serving to me. So thank you. Thank you so much. For those attendees, I've just put a couple links in the chat. I put NOHA's information if you'd like to send an email. If you're a prospective student, our admissions team is happy to reach out to you and do a virtual call about our program if you want to learn more, or you can just learn more about our programs. And I also second Ndalgachu's advice to definitely do the informational coffee, definitely network. I just randomly saw an Instagram post about a candidate running for local politics, and that's how I met Maria. I saw Seferiana out in the campaign trail. That's how I've also been able to build my network. So just getting involved in some way can really help, not just for your application and for the resume, but to really build those connections over time. And that's all we have for tonight. So thank you all so much. Any attendee here and those who registered will get the recording of this session. So we'll email it to you within the next week. But other than that, please have a good night. And thank you all again for being here.
Thank you all. It's good to see you, Ndalgachu.
Thank you.